As by definition I won't be able to say this again, can I take this opportunity of thanking my family, my mother and father and my two brothers, and above all Caroline, who inspired me over the 50 years of our marriage, and my children and grandchildren, and all the many, many other people who supported me, encouraged me, and taught me so much. And I hope that in return I encouraged them, and that I didn't give offence, because I tried to speak my mind, and that's what you have to do in politics. So thank you very much. And I'll check that on transmission.
Give 100% support to those who do not, or cannot, or will not pay the poll tax.
For much of his political career, Tony Benn was seen as a left-wing firebrand, indulging in what he called extra-parliamentary activity, or put simply, taking the argument for socialism onto the streets. His first victory against the establishment was when, as Anthony Wedgwood Benn, he refused to inherit his father's peerage in the early 60s so he could remain an MP, a battle fought not in the barricades, but in the courts and ultimately in the Commons.
You have defeated the Tory cabinet. You have defeated the House of Lords.
As a minister in Harold Wilson's government, he was seen as a moderniser and a technocrat rather than a radical. He helped clear the supersonic Concorde project for takeoff. Wilson later said that Tony Benn immatured with age. Certainly he was one of the few politicians to become more left-wing in office. In 1981, after Labour's election defeat, he split the party down the middle, challenging Dennis Healey for the deputy leadership and losing narrowly. His critics say the divisions he highlighted helped keep Labour from power for almost 2 decades. He argued for nationalisation of the big banks, abolition of the Lords and withdrawal from the EU.
The Humphrey Applebys of every country in Europe have got together and they say, you can't do this, Minister, because we've agreed with the Dutch that if they do this, the Belgians won't object to what the Italians have said to the people from Luxembourg. So the Minister has got no power. Anyway.
In 2001, he said he was leaving Parliament to take up politics and was a leading figure in the campaign to stop the Iraq War. The popularity of his one-man shows, where people across the political spectrum paid to hear his thoughts, confirmed that he'd completed the journey from dangerous radical to national institution. He was also a prolific diarist, a chronicler of contemporary events. And just last year he told the BBC that he remained convinced that politics shouldn't be about shoddy compromise.
My mother said to me once, she said all decisions, including political decisions, are basically moral. Is it right or wrong?
Tony Benn often declared that politics should be about policy, not personality. But today, Westminster has lost one of its most distinctive and distinguished figures.
Some people may be curious as to who the gentleman is that I feature at the end of my videos. That gentleman is Tony Benn. He was a British politician who served for 47 years between the 1950 and 2001 general elections, and a cabinet minister in the Labour governments of Harold Wilson and James Callaghan in the 1960s and 1970s. Originally a moderate, he was identified as being on the party's hard left from the early 1980s and was widely seen as a key proponent of democratic socialism within the party. I've always greatly admired Benn, and for the most part I would consider myself a Bennite, sort of filling that space between democratic socialism and social democracy, if you will. Tony Benn is one of those politicians that people seem to hate at the time he was in power, but then after quitting Parliament was seen as a national treasure. This isn't surprising though. Benn's views have always been popular among the people. He had always advocated for the means of production being obtained by the people as a whole through state ownership, transport, healthcare, utilities like gas and electricity, even banks. He advocated for big businesses to get heavily taxed, and rightly so. Most of the things Benn advocated, the average person would too. But the establishment don't want that. They hate the idea of it. So much like they're doing with Corbyn now, they slandered him throughout his career, made him look like a lunatic or out of touch, made him look unelectable, foolish and unpatriotic. And yet now he's seen as a national treasure, one of our country's most respected politicians of all time, an honest man. It really is a shame that people are so easily misled and manipulated by the largely right-wing owned media and establishment. I often feel like we're not really living in a democracy, and funnily enough, Benn said it himself. Just check out this clip.
I think every single issue that exists today about democracy and throughout history is summed up in the Putney debates. It is a timeless debate, and every time you read it, you see something new that relates to contemporary arguments, whether it's about property or rights, who's entitled to vote. Every one of these questions is still relevant. Democracy is the most revolutionary idea because democracy transfers power from the marketplace to the polling station, from the wallet to the ballot. And if the poor can buy with their vote what they can't afford personally, it absolutely changes society. I think it's questionable whether either in America or Britain we have a democracy, really. I mean, in the United States, an old friend of mine, a former Democratic governor of Ohio, my wife's home state, said to me when I last saw him, "You'll never have democracy in America while big business buys both parties and expects a payoff whichever one wins." And the power of the president, particularly since 9/11, has been very, very formidable. If you take this country, we still don't elect the head of state, we still don't elect the House of Lords. The House of Commons are not allowed to discuss the royal prerogatives which the Prime Minister exercises. And so, in a sense, I think democracy is still very controversial everywhere in the world. I think the other thing I've learned from all this, and I'm not a historian or an academic in any way, every generation has to fight the same battles again and again and again. There is no destination called justice or democracy, and if you catch a train driven by the right man, you'll get there. Every generation has to fight it. And that's the interest of the Putney debates and the English Revolution, that we can draw from debates that occurred long before we were born, things that are relevant to us and will be equally relevant to our grandchildren.
The reason I'm making this video is because I feel like what's happening with the Labour Party today, Jeremy Corbyn and the left as a whole, is a lot like what Tony Benn went through in the past. We're being attacked by the right all the time, and I think it's a joke. The right wing act like everyone on the left is a screaming, SJW-loving, pink-haired liberal, and that simply isn't the case. And those of us on the left who merely want to make the world a better place must come out of the shadows and assert ourselves. Make ourselves known and speak up against the slander that is all too often being thrown our way. If the right wing get their way, we're truly heading for dystopia. I hope you people realise that. We're in troubled times right now, and what's left of common decency is slowly eroding away by a right-wing populist movement that are on their knees, sucking the metaphorical cock of the establishment on a daily basis. These people are such slaves to capitalism, they dare not critique it in any way. They have no interest but in themselves and their own lives. They're not allies to the common man or the working class. Tony Benn had to fight the same fight we have to fight now. As he said, every generation has to fight it. It never ends. Before I go, I'll leave you with this little clip advertising Will and Testament. It's a documentary that was released after Tony Benn's death, about Tony Benn. It truly is a magnificent movie, and I highly recommend you all watch it. It can be found right here on YouTube, and I'll post the links below. Thank you for watching. This is the Rational Leftist signing out, and until next time, keep it rational.
My father once said to me, every life is like a pebble dropped into a pool, and the ripples go backwards and forwards forever, even if you don't see them again, and that is true. If you don't know where you came from, you don't know where you are, and you don't know where you're going. Looking back at what's happened and thinking about it and trying to draw lessons from it is very interesting. Our whole life was transformed by the war. Things were changing so rapidly, and life was so uncertain and so dangerous that it shaped my thinking and clarified my ideas and made me know what I wanted to do. I wanted to go into Parliament. My experience of ministerial life was what turned me to the left. I always saw the Labour Party as an instrument of change, and then I realised as a minister that the government of which I was a member was not involved in changing things, but trying to run the system better. And that is not what I thought it was about. I was once the most dangerous man in Britain, and now I'm described as a national treasure. Being a national treasure is also a danger, because if you're a national treasure, they're really saying you're a kindly, harmless old gentleman. Well, I am kindly, I am old, I could be a gentleman, but I'm not harmless.
People will die because of the BBC decision. Let me be clear about that. Do you listen to me for a moment? Because I feel you brought me here under false pretenses.
No, I'd like to...
Well, and let me make my point. You ought to be factual when you introduce people, and not publicise abuse before you start. I've been meaning to say this to you for years.
And we just report what we find.
I doubt that. I don't think that's what you're doing at all, truthfully, but that's your biz.
Mr. Tony Benn.
Whether you win or lose a battle, in the long run doesn't matter. The question is, did you fight it hard? Whether you win or lose isn't the final determinant of whether it was worth fighting. You have to fight or you lose.
We've tried to make capitalism work with good and humane Labour governments, and we haven't succeeded because it can't work, because it rests on injustice, lives on inequalities, and if you try to modify them, then they turn on you and cut back your gains and throw you back to where you started. I conclude that from the beginning of time, there have always been two flames burning in the human heart. The flame of anger against injustice and the flame of hope you can build a better world. And my job is to go around fanning both flames. I am an optimist because I think that hope is the fuel of progress. If people don't feel that what they do will make a difference, they won't make the effort.
Because I still believe what I believed then, that the alternative is socialism or barbarism. And I tell you which side I'm on. Thank you very much, comrades.